Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. Today, I welcome Mel, where we're going to be talking about self-confidence, journaling, and much, much more that we'll get into today. So a quick introduction to Mel, and then we will dive into today's conversation. So Mel is a Canadian girl living in Houston, Texas, who embraces personal growth and self-discovery, relying on journaling as her companion through life's trials. After her 2018 layoff, she committed to journaling, finding support and decision in its practice, aiding her through job loss, heartbreak, weight loss, and ultimately in living a soul-led life. Motivated by her own transformative experiences, Mel has crafted a journal and framework to empower others in nurturing their own inner wisdom and advocates that all the answers we seek live within us. They just need a place to be heard or written. I totally agree. I'm not just saying that as you as a guest, but yeah, from my own experience, really value what you say about trying to find those answers within us. I must admit, I get out of can get caught out of that sometimes. You know,
The
I see.
same.
Yeah, totally. Like we're all human, right? But yeah, love what your work's about, what you're doing, Mel. So yeah, obviously you can tell your passion by just what you've shared with us, and a little bit in terms of how I just sort of like introduce you and seeing some of your stuff as well. So yeah, like it'd be really interesting to hear how maybe someone it can be a bit overwhelming sometimes, and we get distracted left, right, center. How we can start the practice of journaling, someone who's completely new, and
Yeah.
really maybe sort of a two-part question, I guess, but be very interested in how you're ultimately delivering this to the world a little bit more in different ways.
Yes. So this is like one of the most common questions that I get is how do I start? Because
Mm,
I think intuitively we know that journaling is really a helpful tool, but
mm,
we just don't know what to do when we open up that journal. And that's the feedback I get a lot of the time. I would say where you should really start is just by building the habit. Really start by forgetting about the how. The how is like down the line. The how gets more into when you're trying to be tactical with your journaling practice.
mm,
But in my opinion, the most important thing that journaling gives you is a connection to yourself. So,
mm,
just the act of opening up the journal every single day and having time to be with yourself, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes, is the place to start. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It really is just about carving out that time to be with yourself. And what a lot of people have told me, and I've had this experience too, is that most times it's a fear of what's going to come out when you start writing. There's a lot of fear and resistance, like, I can't open up that can of worms. I'm scared of these emotions. Like, what if they swallow me whole? And so there's all of these fears that are keeping people from even starting. But it's in allowing that to move through you, allowing those emotions to come up, allowing yourself to start creating that relationship with yourself that really reduces the fear and helps you to really get started in creating that relationship with yourself.
yeah, I love that. Like just even starting the habit, it can be quite analytical, but I know
Yes.
my mind can be like many times in my life, like the overthinking. And even when I used to coach people, it's very much like I got this on my mind. So I like
Exactly.
just getting that habit, getting it down. And I like what you said about the connection with ourselves and being able to do that. So with this, are you like how are you sharing this with the world? Just be really interested about how you're doing this. Are you sort of like coaching people through this?
Yeah.
You kind of sharing this a little bit in content, a bit of a
Yes.
mixture.
Yes. So there's a couple different ways. I created a journal, first of all, that, well, I have content online. So you can follow
Mm,
me online. I've got content where where I do talk about
mm,
journaling in general. So on Instagram is where I like to hang. And that's where I'm putting a lot of information in my stories and in my reels of how I've used journaling to navigate life's challenges,
mm,
from binge eating to divorce to
mm.
redefining my career, like so many different ways that I've used journaling.
Wow.
But I created a journal that actually has the format that I've grown to love over the years. So you can start with the journal itself. It's a blank journal, but it has a couple key features. It has a table of contents and page numbers, which are hugely useful because behind me, the people who are listening can't see, but I've got 26 journals lined up behind me of
Mm,
or pages and pages of self-reflection and discovery. And I have found it's very, very helpful to go back and look at your past journal entries to understand yourself. So the journal has the table of contents and page numbers, and it also has worksheets in there, 6 pages of worksheets where it guides you through what I call the conscious journaling framework. So I have an audio series that walks you through the conscious journaling framework. This is really for someone who's ready to take their journaling practice and move towards a specific intention. So the audio series are guided, actually on a private podcast platform. They are guided audio sessions to accompany your journaling practice to work you through a 4-phase framework to moving towards an intention, whether that be quitting your job or finding peace or cultivating that conscious relationship that you're craving or, whatever it might be, increasing your confidence.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, look at it's reminded me as well, like just looking back at your previous entries and yeah, just reflecting back on them. I think it's a really good one. And 26 journals, wow,
Yeah, it's a
that's
lot.
quite a lot.
There's a lot of good stuff with it.
Oh, great. Yes. I love like tracking the journey and what you're doing with that. That's awesome. So yeah, like touching a little bit on what you sort of like finished with saying on like your self-confidence and kind of touch that. For you, how has there been a way that journaling's helped you with self-confidence, would you say?
Definitely. Yeah, I think when I think about confidence, I
Mm,
think about proving to myself that I'm like capable of doing something. And
mm,
so the reflections and the journal entries and looking back on past journals, a lot of times we can forget what we've achieved. We can
mm,
forget what we've overcome. We can forget every single thing we've been through. So when I go back and I look at my past journal entries and I see what I have been able to navigate in my life, that in itself just
mm,
boosts the confidence. It's like, whoa, I forgot how hard that was because so many times we're working towards tomorrow. And it's like, hey, there was a past version of you who dreamed about today. Look at everything you had to get through to get to today. And so you can build confidence in not only drawing strength from the past and what you've overcome, but also when you're in the moment and you are working towards a specific intention, incorporating look backs and looking back frequently at your progress, like within a month, and seeing, oh my goodness, like I wasn't being consistent with my workouts and now I am. And wow, like these small little shifts are really adding up and I feel better in my body and whatever that might be. Reviewing those past journal entries helps you to see how far you have come. It you can't deny it because our minds can
mm,
play tricks on us, but then when you go back and physically read it, it's a completely different experience.
mm. Yeah, yeah, it's easy to forget sometimes, like things
Yeah.
we've done, and yeah, I just thought, even I'm guilty of it sometimes, but you know, every morning in my journaling just to share with people, like, I don't write this down, but I'm sometimes reading things, reflecting on things. It's like 50 reasons why, you know, I'm awesome in this area, and it's where I'm saying I'm awesome in that area. It's usually an area where I have, you know, a lot of challenges that just reminds me. And then reading that helps me, yeah, remember the
Exactly.
greatness, right?
Exactly, because it's so easy to be like think that we're like this constant
Mm,
project that needs to be fixed. I feel like the personal development world, I kinda got swooped into that for a little bit of feeling like there was always something wrong with me, there was always something that needed to be fixed, but in
yeah,
fact,
it's a good
there's
point.
just so much greatness and resilience and tenacity in what I have overcome, and focusing more on that helps me move forward and navigate life's challenges versus focusing on all the things that I need to fix about myself.
So you kind of been looking, if I've got this right, like more on how you're like growing and it's an evolving journey, but actually all the tools, all the skills, all the challenges you've overcome, as a result, help you to kind of continue that growth rather than there's a gap, like
Yes,
something wrong with me. And yeah,
exactly,
ultimately, I love that.
exactly.
Brilliant. Have you a lot of a lot of challenges I often like speak to like listeners from like listeners podcasts or maybe even someone I've coached. And admittedly, I'm a human being. We I have my own fears. Everyone has fears, right?
Yeah.
Um, Particularly like I was actually at a conference in Atlanta recently, and we were talking about all these main fears and things like that. And one of them's like the fear of rejection and failure that a lot of people really report like challenging with. For you, has journaling provided, or maybe it has, maybe it hasn't, we just talked about confidence, but been useful for working through fears at all?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I feel like fear is probably maybe the biggest thing that keeps us from growing, really, because
Mm,
a lot of times we have this relationship with fear where it comes up and it's like, oh, that means turn around and go back the other way.
mm.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with parts work or parts therapy, the internal family systems.
Not
Work.
as into it, but may have
Okay.
come across it at some point, but it doesn't ring a
Okay.
bell.
Well, basically, the whole idea is that we are made up of so many different parts, and fear
Mm,
is one of those parts. So, in my journaling practice, when I'm noticing myself come up against resistance, when I notice
mhm,
myself falling into patterns, and I'm like, oh, here I go again, one of my old patterns, I'll give you a tangible example, is I used to binge eat. So when I notice that I am leaning on food to handle my emotions, I know that I'm like in a negative spiral and I'm kind of moving backwards. So I use that as an indicator and I'm like, whoa, okay, there's some fear, there's some resistance. In my journaling practice, I speak to fear. And I literally, it's like an open dialogue. I'm like, Melanie, and I'm like, hey, fear, what do you have to say? And then I write from fear. And then fear starts to speak to me and it starts to say a bunch of stuff. And a lot of it is super irrational. And some of it is actually some pretty good tips. Like even before this podcast episode, it's like a little bit of nerves. It's natural to feel a little bit anxious. And so some of it is super irrational. And then some of it's like, okay, well, make sure you prepare. Make sure that your energy is cleared before you start this podcast episode. Make sure that the house is quiet and you put on some calm music and you get grounded before you come. So rather than saying we're just going to ignore fear, you give it a voice and you integrate it and you extract the wisdom that fear really has to tell you, because all of these different parts
mm,
of us, I think it's very easy to think we just need to like blow past them, but really they have a lot to say and they can really help us to grow.
mm. So understanding that what that voice is almost of the fear and understanding it better
Yes,
for that awareness. I like that.
exactly.
Got you, got you. And
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, for me, it's crazy when I've journaled like a fear. It's even if something minor, like you would look at like externally, or someone like outside of you might look at, and you think, oh, it's a tiny thing, but that's like you see something on social media. But I remember like it going through the whole entire body, and it's just like. But actually, what I found when I've like maybe journaled or reflected on it is actually it's crazy, but this is how the mind works. It comes like eventually down to like the fear of death. It's like this kind of like rejection. I'm not enough. I'm not lovable.
Yes.
Rejected before then. It comes down to like fear of death, and it's like, oh, interesting. And sometimes I have to navigate that narrative through journaling. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
super interesting. And it's
it
like, well,
is.
actually, it's not that, but it's trying to keep me safe. Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, and when you draw that extraction, you're like, oh, like this is a fear of death. I think it's very easy for you to then like rationalize, like, okay, like I'm not going to die from doing this podcast episode. And it super diffuses it. Or maybe there's an opportunity for you to do some like inner child healing if it's super
Mm,
triggering from something that happened when you were younger. Because Carl Jung, he has this quote that I like absolutely love: until you make the unconscious conscious, it
yeah.
will direct your life and you'll call it fate. So in your journaling practice and when these fears and things come up, like those are the moments to like dig up that subconscious and understand like where is this really coming from and is there a way that I can reparent myself to make it feel less intense next go around.
Mm. I like the a big fan of the quote "making the unconscious conscious" by Carl Jung. It's it's like the third time in a week it's come up. So it's like, yeah, it's one of those classic
Yes,
signs. Yeah, yeah.
it is.
It's
It really is. It's so good. It is so good.
I love it. Yeah, it's a good one. But I'm really, you touched on the inner child, and I'm going to touch on that because I'm a big fan. And like, even as kind of, I've got this quite, through my life, I've this quite like intense, like masculine go, 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 like achiever stuff. I still doing quite a lot of areas. But for me, I've, in the last year, allowed myself to cry like a little boy and then hug my
Mm,
teddy bear and stuff, doing this inner child work. And it's really healing. So
that's amazing.
it's like, having a journal and then going into inner child, do you kind of combine that
Oh, yeah.
regularly?
Oh,
I'm just
yes, all the
interested.
times. The viewers again can't see it, but I have pictures of me as a little child in my, like, I call it my Zen den. So
Mm,
I'll pull her out and take a look and literally look at pictures of me while I'm journaling to my inner child. So similar to the
mm,
fear and having the dialogue with the fear, I'll have the conversation with my inner child and see what she has to say to me. And so I've got the picture, I'm writing back and forth to her. And then to take
mm.
it to the next
Writing.
level, a lot of times what my inner child has said to me is like, don't abandon me. Like, you keep forgetting about me. Like, stop forgetting about me. Why do you keep trying to quiet me? And so, when I have really impactful dialogue with my inner child in my journaling practice, I'll put that into my table of contents of my journal and I'll put a calendar reminder. Hey, check in back on that
Mm,
dialogue and check back in with her and how's she doing because it's so easy to just like go, go, go and keep it moving. And I feel like you're not really, like, starting from square one when you're restarting that conversation, when you go back and you reread that dialogue, it almost, like, brings it all back up, and it makes it a little easier for you to get connected back to your inner child.
mm. Yeah, putting the reminders in is a really useful one. It can be very sort of like hectic and manic life. And as adults, the way I thought of it was like, it's like if I don't have any children, but it's like if I had my own child, it's like I'd just be like, no, I'm ignoring you all day, never talking to you. That's a deprived
Exactly.
child. Yeah.
Yes, we would never do that, and so I, like if I'm in a season where my inner child is super triggered, she'll be on the front of my phone cover, she's on the back of my laptop, like, just really keeping her forward so she can really feel more integrated in a part of me so that I'm not just ignoring her, and I'll do similar to you, I'll take her out on ice cream dates or
Mm,
whatever it might be, where you're just kind of spending some time and being playful and giving her or him what they weren't able to have when they were younger.
mm. The writing the letter it's a new one. I might have done that before, but it's not a practice I've done. So you've kind of given me another idea for connecting with that inner child. I quite like to feel rather than writing and just being like with him sometimes. So it's yeah, like the writing the letter idea. That's a good one. I'm gonna do. I think so.
I'm excited
Appreciate
to
that.
hear how it goes.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
love writing letters to her. She's way
Oh,
more
amazing.
vocal when we're writing. Mine, anyways.
Ah, that's awesome. And yeah, remember wherever you're listening, you've all got a different connection to your inner child. But yeah, I've never met anyone who said it wasn't beneficial to connect with their inner child when they've done that
Same,
work. Yeah, so that's
same.
awesome. So yeah, Mel, like I just want to before we sort of like wrap up, I wanted to ask you a couple more things.
Sure.
But yeah, if you were to this is something I'd like to ask everyone. If you were to give us your number one tip for confidence today, maybe it's something we've talked about in this podcast, maybe it's just a recap point, or maybe it's something else. What would that be?
Number one tip for confidence. I would say the number one tip for confidence is taking the action and allowing the action taking to build that confidence within you. I
Mm,
spent a lot of my life journaling about wanting to do things or thinking about wanting to do things or talking about wanting to do things, hoping that eventually I would build enough confidence to do the thing. And what I've realized is that it's actually taking the action and taking the action even before you're ready. I'm a healing
mm,
perfectionist. Um, Even taking the action before you're ready, that is what starts to build confidence. And starting with little baby micro sized bites. When I was in my health journey and I needed to lose, well, I wanted to lose 60 pounds to get healthy. It didn't start by me completely like overhauling my entire pantry and getting on P90X and all of these sorts of things. It started with like building a habit of going on a daily walk. And then once that was integrated, add another thing and another thing. So I think it's really the action that builds the confidence within you because you're like, oh, look at what I did. It just like builds that inner confidence.
I'm glad you said that because, well, again, it's all different views, but we've been talking about like journaling and reflecting. And I know I've met some people who are like very good, like learners and like reflectors. And they're like, I'm not getting the results. It's like, well, what action are you taking?
Exactly.
There is that point, right? I mean, our mentor, he's always pushing well, a guy, I also work for him, but I'm also in the community. But he pushed us to, because there's a lot of people nervous about going out there and making eye contact with people in public. Gradually get to a point where you're building the conversations. So yeah, it's an interesting one taking that action.
It really is. And honestly, the framework I was telling you about, the four phases are like setting an intention for the change,
Yeah.
cultivating awareness around what it is you're wanting to move towards. So that's a lot in your journaling practice. But the third phase is integration, and that is all action. And I feel like that is where I think a lot of people right now have the awareness. They understand, they have the verbiage to say, oh, that's my inner child being triggered. But it's like, what are you doing about it? And
Mm,
that's the integration and the action piece, really. And then wrap it up with reflection. But the integration piece, I think, is the part that most people definitely miss.
mm. Great all round guidance today. Thank you so much, Mel, with the integrating it as we've ended on, but also journaling to really create that connection with ourselves as well. So yeah, like obviously we could go on for a bit, but if the listener wants to find out more about you or find some of your work, they really want to get into journaling or change their approach, where can they find you?
I hang out most on Instagram. So if you
Mhm.
follow me at The Conscious Journaler, I'm on there. I have all my links to everything, to my website, to the journal, to the audios that I spoke of. But even if you just want to follow along, like I post my journal every single morning, it's kind of like an accountability thing that people tell me, like every time I see you journaling, it reminds me I need to journal. So even if that's just your very first integration, is just the follow and pulling your journal out, I think it's an amazing first step.
Ah, great stuff. We'll be sure to link that up. So once again, Mel, a massive thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. This was amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So that concludes our episode for today. And remember, you are in control of your own self esteem and confidence.